Shalom, this is Daniel of Netivyah, and today we're going to talk about Syria, a little bit about Lebanon, and some other things in the area, but it will more be a preview of what I hope will be next week's episode, which I'm going to film tomorrow, but we'll give it to you next week, because this next week I'm going to be flying to London with my daughter to go watch musicals. So, huzzah! But in any case, today we're going to talk about what's been going on in Syria, and it's super interesting. But before we say that, I just want to mention that Steve Witkoff, the President Trump's special emissary to Russia and to the Middle East, who's been doing a pretty impressive job, said two interesting remarks lately. Yesterday, both of them. One is that the supposed second stage of the negotiation includes 19 hostages, 16 of them civilian and 3 of them military, who are alive. And so that's just interesting tidbit of information. And the second thing, which is slightly more relevant, or actionable I should say, is that Israel will be sending the negotiating team to Qatar today to negotiate about the second stage, or whether the first stage will be lengthened and whatnot and so forth. So there's still a traction and movement on that front. Additionally, as of this filming, we've just experienced the funeral of the 3 Bibas family members, Kfir, Ariel, and Shiri, who were laid to rest today. So it's a very solemn day here in Israel. So just pray for the country and the Bibas family in particular. But let's move on. So let's first start with a little bit about Lebanon, and then we'll tie it in later to what we're going to talk about in Syria. So in Lebanon, there are 3 interesting reports. One is that Israel, the IDF and the Israeli intelligence is expecting the Hezbollah to, at some point in the relatively near future, I would put it in weeks and not in days, to start attempting to attack the 5 IDF outposts in South Lebanon, which they haven't done so far. Just throwing it out there. But more interesting, that's more of just kind of a bit of speculation, intelligence gathering. More interesting is that there was a report that the United States has put pressure on the Lebanese government and Lebanese military to disarm or disband Hezbollah within half a year, or else they will cease all financial aid to Lebanon. Now, again, this is just one report. I don't know how accurate it is, whether it will go into effect, so on and so forth, but it's interesting. And to add to that, the new Lebanese president, Joseph Aoun, former chief of staff, who is Sunni and not thrilled with Hezbollah, has stated yesterday that Lebanon will no longer be used as a platform for people who are not the Lebanese or the Lebanese army to attack other countries. Now, that can be understood in 2 ways. One is Lebanon does not want the Israel Air Force to use Lebanon as it does attacks on other countries in the region, such as Syria or potentially Iran, though that's not really on the route. But in any case, and the other, which is of course much more interesting, is that Lebanon no longer wants Syria, Iran, the Hezbollah, and so on, Palestinian terrorists, to use Lebanon to attack Israel. So that's in regards to Lebanon, and we'll get back to Lebanon in a moment. But in Syria, there's much more interesting things going on. So let's start with the fact that Israel yesterday did some airstrikes on Damascus and on the Dara province. Specifically, they attacked arms depots and bases in Iranian-controlled neighborhoods of Damascus, and in also supposedly in Syrian regime, the new regime's arms in Daraa. And the message, which was stated quite clearly, not just by the actions, but also in words by the defense minister Israel Katz, is Israel will not allow southern Lebanon, southern Syria, to be transformed into a place like southern Lebanon. That Israel will make sure that from the border with Israel and until Damascus, that area will become a demilitarized zone. And the response to that were demonstrations and protests, not very widespread, but demonstrations and protests which called on Jolani, the leader of the new Syrian regime, to attack Israel and attack Tel Aviv and so on and so forth. There hasn't been a response by Jolani himself, except some lackluster statements about Syrian integrity and so on and so forth. But here's an interesting report, which I viewed myself. Druze, which is one of the ethnic nations in Syria, and Druze are also in Lebanon and in Israel. And in Israel, they're very devoted to Israel and serve in the army with honor and are very appreciated and loyal. The Druze in Syria are starting to, well, the one I saw was wearing military garb and publicly was declaring loyalty and allegiance to Israel, despite the protests going on asking Jolani to attack Tel Aviv. It was a reaction to those protests. Additionally, there's a report that Israel, and specifically the IDF, will be allowing 70,000 Syrian Druze to work within Israel. I'm going back to the previous report, that the fact that a Syrian Druze in military fatigues is willing to publicly, show in his face, say what he said is something that half a year ago would have been a death warrant. So my point is things are changing there. Israel is, in some sense, taking ownership over the Druze ethnic nation within Syria and helping them, advancing them, protecting them. So that's very interesting. What else? So basically, what I'm going to talk about next week is the grand Mideast plan that has already started to be implemented in 2022, 3 years ago, and that Trump's plan for Gaza is just a small part of it, and it involves a lot of countries and a lot of changes, and we'll talk about that in the next video. But what's going on in Syria is just a taste of that, and it will relate also to the Palestinians and also to Jordan, and it's very, very cool changes that are going on. So keep all of that in your prayers. For 30 years, the liberal left has been talking about a new Middle East in regards to the two-state solution and peace treaties that have never had any chance of success and were terrible and had thousands of victims. And now there's a new conversation about a new Middle East that's being led by Donald Trump, Netanyahu, the Abraham Accords, and so much more. So, and how does Lebanon fit into that? I told you I'd get back to that. Well, it's just the fact that you can see a change in the attitude and the mentality, like the president's proclamation about not having Lebanon be used as a front for attacks. And again, we'll connect those dots in the next video. So for now, God bless you all. Remember to share and comment and like and click and pray and support. And thank you for everything that you do for us. Shalom.